Rain tapped against the glass windshield as Ethan Parker sat motionless inside his parked truck outside Starbucks, fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He tried breathing slowly, but every breath came out shaky, uneven, almost painful. Through the fog window, he watched the scene he was never meant to see. His wife, Madison, sitting across from Damien, the tall man Ethan recognized instantly from old photos and stories she once shared casually. Her ex-boyfriend. They weren't talking like co-workers catching up. There was something intimate, comfortable, too familiar. Damien reached across the table and gently took Madison's hand. She didn't flinch or pull away. She smiled, that soft, glowing smile Ethan once believed was only for him. At that exact moment, Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from Madison saying she'd be working late. His pulse thundered. He had just watched her lie in real time. Ethan drove home in heavy silence, barely blinking as the city lights blurred past him like streaks of broken memories. His mind replayed everything. Their wedding day, her bright smile as she walked down the aisle, the vows they whispered promising honesty and forever. The contrast between that memory and what he had just witnessed felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He tried to tell himself there must be an explanation, but the laughter he saw, the warmth on her face, the way her hand stayed in Damien's, all of it spoke louder than excuses. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his entire body felt drained, like he had aged years in 1 hour. Still, he swallowed his pain, wiped his eyes before tears could fall, and stepped into the house they once called a home built on trust. Madison entered the house minutes later, her hair slightly tousled, and her clothes smelling faintly of expensive cologne. Not Ethan's. He stood in the kitchen, leaning on the counter not in anger but in painful confusion. When he asked softly, "Who were you with tonight?" the air turned sharp. Madison froze for a beat, her eyes narrowing instead of softening, then replied with a cold, dismissive tone Ethan had never heard from her before. "Let's not do this. I'm tired." She brushed past him without offering a hug, a reason, or even guilt. Ethan stayed where he was, unable to move, feeling something inside his chest break quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that felt irreversible. Later, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she slept beside him peacefully. He didn't cry, but he knew something in their marriage had already died. Ethan Parker had never been the loudest voice in any room, but he was always the most dependable, a humble mechanical engineer. He preferred quiet dinners at home over parties and valued loyalty above all else. When he first met Madison, she was a dreamer with fire in her eyes, ambitious, social, confident, unapologetically determined to climb the corporate world. They married young with nothing but love, sharing a tiny apartment and big hopes. Ethan worked double shifts to support Madison while she pursued her MBA, believing wholeheartedly in her talent. She would come home exhausted, and he would massage her shoulders, prepare her favorite meals, and tell her she was destined for greatness. Back then, Madison would look at him with gratitude and say he was her safe place, her anchor. Their love was strong enough to get through anything, or so Ethan believed. Things began to change slowly, so slowly Ethan didn't realize the shift at first. After Madison reconnected with old college friends, her world grew louder, flashier, and faster. Nights out replaced quiet evenings. Designer clothes appeared in their closet, without explanation. Ethan noticed her phone, once left anywhere freely. Now guarded, always face down, always locked. Whenever Damien's name came up, she suddenly became strangely defensive, insisted he was just a friend, and that Ethan was being insecure for even asking. Ethan tried to fix what he thought was slipping away. Surprise date nights, small gifts, handwritten notes, emotional vulnerability. Everything he had to give. But Madison responded with sighs, eye rolls, and irritation, as if love had become a burden. Soon, friends who once adored Ethan began drifting away, labeling him boring because he preferred stability over chaos. Madison, however, soaked up every bit of attention. The compliments, the admiration, the nightlife, the social media glow. Ethan slowly became a ghost in his own marriage, moving around the edges of Madison's new world where he no longer seemed to fit. Still, he remained hopeful, loyal to the vows that meant everything to him. He convinced himself that the woman he fell in love with was still there somewhere, just overwhelmed or confused. So he stayed kind. He stayed patient. He stayed faithful, even as he watched himself become emotionally invisible. He didn't blame her. He blamed himself for not being enough. The house was unusually quiet the night Madison asked, "Can we talk?" Her tone was flat, almost rehearsed, and she refused to meet Ethan's eyes. They sat in the living room on opposite ends of couch, a distance that suddenly felt symbolic of everything that had gone wrong. Ethan tried to smile, tried to be patient, tried to be the man who always listened. But then she took a slow breath and delivered the blow with the calmness of someone discussing whether, "Let's just be friends. Damien needs me more right now." Ethan blinked, thinking he misheard. Friends? After vows, years, sacrifices? She went on, voice cold, unemotional, explaining that she felt more alive around Damien, that Ethan was good, but not exciting. Every word shattered him in real time. His heart raced, breath stopped, and for the first time he had no idea who he was to her anymore. Ethan tried to hold himself together, begging for clarity, for some sign that she still cared, but Madison watched him break apart with the emotional detachment of a stranger. She didn't ask for a divorce. Instead, she proposed something unthinkable, that Ethan should stay in the house as friends while she figured out her feelings for Damien without pressure or commitment. Every sentence felt like a stab. She was asking him to watch her explore a relationship with another man while expecting him to quietly coexist beside her. Ethan cried for the first time in years, shoulders shaking, voice cracking, memories flashing through his mind like a slideshow of everything he thought would last. Madison didn't reach for him, didn't comfort him, didn't hesitate. "I just need space to do what makes me happy," she said, as if his happiness didn't matter at all. Days turned into weeks, and Madison moved into the guest room without shame or sadness. Her nights grew longer, always dressed up, always leaving with perfume and excitement that Ethan no longer recognized. She came home late, sometimes early morning, and Ethan pretended to be asleep because witnessing her return hurt more than words. Then the final humiliation reached him through whispers. Madison had been telling people they were basically separated, using his money, eating at his table, living under his roof while emotionally belonging to someone else. Ethan reached emotional rock bottom, not just because his wife loved someone else, but because he wasn't even allowed to let go. He had become a placeholder, a financial safety net, a shadow in his own home. In the quiet of night, staring at the ceiling, he finally admitted to himself. She had replaced him long before she said the words. The disrespect stopped being subtle. Madison now texted Damien openly, right in front of Ethan, giggling, smiling at her phone, acting as if Ethan didn't exist. Sometimes she would tilt the screen slightly just to make sure he couldn't see, but the smirk on her face said she wanted him to wonder. She came home late, smelling of perfume, alcohol, and someone else's cologne, tossing her heels on the floor before collapsing in the guest room to sleep until afternoon. Ethan would quietly make breakfast, hoping maybe she'd eat. She never did. On weekends, Damien posted cryptic pictures on Instagram, nightlife snapshots, a woman's hand in his hair, captions like, "Some people just don't satisfy their women." The comments and emojis told the truth Ethan could barely breathe through. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was humiliation. Public humiliation. And Madison laughed at his silence like it proved her superiority. The breaking point didn't arrive in a scream. It arrived in a whisper overheard from behind a half-closed bedroom door. Madison, lying lazily on her bed, talking to a friend on speakerphone, bragged, "Ethan's too weak to leave. I can have both, Damien for passion, Ethan for stability." She laughed, proud of the arrangement, proud of using him. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding in his ears, but somehow he didn't walk in, didn't confront her. The humiliation wasn't emotional anymore. It was chemical, burning through his veins. Yet he stayed quiet, invisible, unnoticed. That night he lay awake, not crying, just listening to the silence in his own chest. Something irreversible was shifting. Love was dying, but awareness was being born. Pain was still there, but it had changed shape, from heartbreak to clarity. The next morning, Ethan didn't beg, didn't question, didn't argue. Instead, he watched and finally learned. Madison continued flaunting her cruelty, believing she was untouchable. Meanwhile, a silent transformation began. Ethan created a new folder on his computer. Receipts of her club charges, screenshots of her affectionate messages to Damien, video clips of her stumbling and drunk at 3 a.m., proof of her recklessness and spending. He documented everything methodically, emotionlessly, night after night. He updated the folder while Madison assumed he was breaking on the inside. She didn't see the change in his eyes. Not rage, not grief, but strategy. The switch flipped. Ethan stopped crying, stopped trying to win her back, stopped explaining himself. He wasn't trying to save the marriage anymore. He was preparing to save himself. And Madison, blind in her arrogance, believed she had already won. Madison strutted around the house all week preparing for what she called a friendly dinner to show how mature we all are, as a betrayal could be rebranded as sophistication. When she announced she wanted to bring Damien into their home, the home Ethan built for them, she watched for a reaction, waiting to taste his pain. But Ethan simply smiled and said, "Sure." The lack of protest convinced her she had completely broken him. So the dinner night arrived. Soft jazz playing in the background, candles lit, wine poured. Damien acted like he owned the space, touching Madison's waist, flirting openly, laughing loudly at inside jokes Ethan wasn't part of. Madison looked proud of both men sitting at the same table, proud of her power, proud of her evolved life. She didn't notice Ethan's steady hands or the quiet fire in his eyes. She thought he was defeated, halfway through the bottle of wine. Ethan stood up calmly and left the room, returning with a thick folder. He placed it on the table the same way a surgeon might place instruments before an operation, precise, emotionless. Madison laughed nervously, asking, "What's that?" Ethan opened it. Divorce papers, screenshots of messages, bank statements showing Madison uses money to support her nightlife and Damien, time-stamped videos of her stumbling home drunk. The room fell silent except for Madison's shaky breathing. Ethan spoke with quiet clarity, not anger, not tears. He had already filed. The court date was secured. Because of infidelity, Madison would receive no spousal support and would be legally required to vacate the house within 30 days. Copies of the evidence were already prepared for her company's HR department, violating workplace conduct rules. Her entire world began collapsing second by second, and she couldn't breathe. What Madison didn't expect, and what destroyed her completely, was Damien's reaction. The moment Ethan explained the consequences, Damien pushed back from the table, face twisting with disgust and panic. "Are you insane?" he snapped at Madison. "You're a liability. You're going to drag me down with you." Madison reached for him, begging him to understand. But Damien was already grabbing his jacket, muttering about not wanting to be involved with someone this messy. He stormed out without looking back. In one night, the future she traded her marriage for disappeared in front of her eyes. Madison collapsed to the floor, crying, shaking, begging for a second chance. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't comfort her. He simply watched. The same silence she once used against him now returned to her. For the first time in months, Ethan finally felt something close to peace. The move-out happened quietly. Madison packed her things over 2 days, eyes swollen, makeup streaked, trying to start conversations Ethan no longer entertained. She called his name softly, offered apologies, blamed stress, begged for just one last chance to talk. But Ethan had finally learned that closure from a person who broke you is just another form of control. He stayed firm, expression calm but unreadable. After she left, the calls started. Long voicemails filled with sobbing, guilt, regret. Texts blaming herself, then blaming him, then begging again. Eventually, every number she used was blocked. Madison watched life shrink around her. Friends disappeared, uncomfortable with the drama. Damien refused to answer, and her fancy world was replaced by a small rented apartment with dim lighting and silence. The pedestal she once stood on had turned to dust, and she had no one left to blame but herself. Ethan didn't heal overnight, but this time, healing had a direction. Therapy became a safe space where he relearned his own worth in measured, fragile steps. He joined a gym not to impress anyone, but to feel strong again. His evenings, once filled with silence and heartbreak, were now spent cooking for one, learning new recipes, enjoying peace instead of chaos. Slowly, woodworking turned from a hobby into a purpose. He recorded small videos of handcrafted tables, shelves, and decor, posting them online. Orders trickled in, then doubled. For the first time in a long time, he woke up with something to look forward to. His reflection in the mirror changed too, not just physically, but in his eyes. There was life again, curiosity again, hope again. He wasn't rebuilding for someone else. He was rebuilding for himself. One afternoon, a customer named Olivia picked up a custom bookshelf. She was soft-spoken, patient, and gentle in the way she interacted with the world, not demanding attention, not seeking dominance. She admired the craftsmanship with sincere warmth, asked Ethan about his process, and didn't once comment on his appearance or relationship status. She simply saw him, the work, the passion, the person. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and Ethan laughed at one of her jokes without realizing he had done it until afterward. The sound startled him and then comforted him. It wasn't love, not yet, and it wasn't supposed to be, but with connection, real, simple, unforced. When she left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't surviving. He was living. Months later, the world looked different, not because it had changed, but because Ethan had. At the community art fair, sunlight filtered through trees, while vendors set up tents and families wandered past handmade crafts. Ethan arranged his wooden pieces carefully, each one representing a chapter of his healing. Olivia stood beside him, laughing lightly as she helped adjust the price tags, proud to be part of his world. She didn't hover, didn't cling. She simply showed up. When people stopped by to admire his work, she introduced him with genuine excitement, and Ethan smiled without forcing it. His life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and that peace felt earned. Then, from across the fair, Ethan noticed Madison. Thinner than before, eyes sunken, posture fragile. She watched him with a look he recognized instantly, regret. Silent, understanding passed between them before she dared to walk toward him. Madison approached slowly, as if afraid the ground might crumble beneath her. She didn't wear arrogance anymore. She wore consequences. When she finally stood in front of Ethan, her voice was barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" Her eyes were red, pleading, desperate for even a scrap of connection she once dismissed like it was nothing. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and didn't feel hatred, didn't feel longing, didn't feel the old ache. He felt peace. The kind that comes after the storm, not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer owned him. His reply wasn't cruel. It was final. "There's nothing left to say." Madison's tears flowed instantly because she finally understood. He was not angry anymore. He was done. The realization broke her far more than any revenge ever could. Ethan turned away gently, not dramatically, not triumphantly, just naturally, as if her presence no longer controlled the direction of his life. He returned to his booth where Olivia adjusted one of the wooden displays he had made. Without thinking, without hesitation, Ethan took her hand, not for show, not for validation, but because it felt right. Madison watched from a distance as they shared a small laugh, a small moment, a small victory of quiet love and healing. She didn't collapse or scream. She simply walked away, realizing that the punishment for losing something real is living long enough to understand its value. Ethan didn't destroy her life. He didn't have to. He just rebuilt his own, and that was enough. A soft breeze carried the unspoken truth, one that would echo long after the scene ended. Sometimes the person who breaks you isn't the villain, they're the lesson.